May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O God, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen. Amen. So when I was a kid, my grandparents used to load all of us cousins up and take us to the lake that was not far from where we lived. It had this little beach. It was a great place for a picnic. And we would go swimming and spend our summers there. There were a lot of memories made there, and so when I was back in the area a few years ago, I went by to take a stroll down memory lane. And as I was walking up the deserted little beach, I noticed this great big sign that read, "Danger, watch for snakes." Well, that got my attention, and my ophidiophobia, my nearly irrational fear of snakes, kicked into high gear and paralyzed me for a moment as I quickly looked around to see what else might be on the ground near me. And when I saw my grandmother after that, I mentioned to her that they had put up this new sign at the lake. And she looked at me and said, "Oh, honey, that sign's always been there. Danger, watch for snakes." It was a warning for those of us with enough sense to heed it. That there are dangerous creatures out there that can bite us and hurt us, and perhaps even kill us. So we're told to avoid the snakes, and that if we see one, to get out of the way as if that would be a problem. Well, that is good advice, and it makes sense, and I suspect that that's how most of us live our lives each day. And it's not really about the snakes that slither around on the ground, though. We live in such a way that is how we regard all the snakes in our lives. It's how we avoid those things that we're afraid of. Those things that can potentially hurt us and cause us pain. Not just physical pain, but emotional and spiritual pain as well. And so we spend our lives fearfully watching for the snakes. And we also end up avoiding and dealing with our addictions and our attachments, and we ignore our broken relationships in our lives. We put off doing that hard work that life often demands of us. And we turn away from our challenges and repress painful memories and resist even acknowledging our fears and our resentments and our anger. And we refuse to talk or even to think about our own death. We try to deny those things we've done, and we ignore those things we've left undone. After all, isn't that what the sign tells us to do? If you see a snake, run away. But what if there was a different sign posted by that lake? What if there was a sign that read, "If you see a snake, look it square in the eyes and stare it down, and dare to see who blinks first"? Well, that certainly would not be my response. It sounds more than a little bit crazy. It sounds insane even, but that's exactly what God told the Hebrew people to do in this morning's lesson. There they were, wandering around, lost in the wilderness, afraid of dying, facing an uncertain future with an unknown destination. There was an emptiness in them. They were thirsty. They were hungry. Their lives were difficult. It doesn't sound all that different from the lives many of us have lived this past year, full of fear and uncertainty and anxiety. And it all manifested as snakes in the wilderness. Snakes that would slither into their tents and bite them and wound them and kill them. They would have to face the reality of their snakes. It seems to me that a smart Hebrew person would turn around and run as fast and as far as one could. But when they had tried that, they died. Because you see, we're not saved from our snakes by running away. God offers us a different option. Instead of turning and running away, the salvation that God offered the Hebrew people was one that demanded that they stare down the very thing they feared. Because God's ways are not our ways, nor God's thoughts our thoughts. Obviously, God's logic, too often it seems that seems to us imperfect and finite mortals is foolishness. You see, somehow living an authentic life demands that we face down and look at the reality of death. Not just our physical death, but all the many ways that we die just a little bit each day. We experience all these small deaths in all sorts of ways. In our disappointments, in our failures, in our shattered dreams. We see a glimpse of death in our regrets and in our sorrows, in our anger, in our fear, in our resentments. We see it in the losses we grieve and in the broken relationships we experience, and in the separation and isolation that is caused by sin in our lives. After all, isn't that what sin is? Anything that separates us from God's presence. But God gave us a remedy for death. And it's one that reveals to us that the serpent in the wilderness is both the agent of death and the agent of healing. Have you ever noticed that the symbol of healing is that same staff with the serpent wrapped around it that God told Moses would save anyone who had been bitten if only they look at it? The cross of death has become for us the cross of life. God tells us to look at it. Look at the very thing that you fear, the very thing that bites us and terrorizes us and kills us. Those are the places where Jesus Christ stands victorious. God does not remove the dangers from our past nor the difficulties from our lives. Instead, God gives us a remedy and a way forward. As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must Jesus, the Son of Man, be lifted up. God became incarnate here in this world, took on flesh as one of us in the person of Jesus, in order to stand with us in the snake-infested places, to heal us and to make us alive, and to lift us up to the heavenly places. Because in Jesus, the places of fear become places of courage. In Jesus, the places of sin become the places of forgiveness. In Jesus, the places of wounding become the places of healing. In Jesus, the places of death become the places of life. In Jesus, the places where we fall down become the places where we are raised up. God takes the very thing that destroys life in this human world that we live in and turns them into instruments of healing and salvation in God's kingdom. In God's world, the cure for snakes is a snake. The cure for human life in God's incarnate life in Jesus, and the cure for death is death. For those of us who are willing to look into the snake-infested places of our lives, we will see the Son of Man being lifted up. The very healing and the transformation of this world and this life. Jesus says to each one of us, look on me, believe on me, and live. Turn your gaze toward me and you will be saved by the same God who sent me, Jesus says. I have not come to condemn the world, but to love the world and to offer salvation. During this holy season of Lent, as we make our way ever closer to the death and the agony of the cross, we're asked to discover for ourselves and to name the snakes in our lives. And then we're called to make a decision. Will we turn and run, or will we turn and gaze? Will we lift our eyes up to meet the gaze of love, to meet the gaze of Jesus, the cross, the Christ? Will we turn and run, or will we turn and gaze? Amen.